Over the course of my life, there are a few sounds I've heard that instantly made me fall in love with electronic music. Something about these sounds filled me with inspiration to create music of my own, only to get discouraged when my music came out feeling meaningless and devoid of life in comparison. Sound familiar? I think this is a journey that every artist goes on, and getting over this hurdle levels up your ability to create something that people can actually resonate with. So what is the secret that many of today's top producers seem to have mastered? Well, I've actually gone on this journey myself and spent a lot of time studying and recreating these famous synths from scratch. This video is going to show you exactly how you can incorporate these techniques I've learned over the past 10 years as a sound designer and help you implement it into your own music using entirely free tools. Starting with this boring saw wave pluck, we are going to turn it into something much more emotional and interesting with the techniques I'm about to reveal in this video. Before we go any further, this video is sponsored by us, Anima.audio. We have tons of free and premium Vital presets and more on the way. Check out a few sounds from our pack Memoria, which includes 70 Vital presets along with a custom skin. Oh, and by the way, that home resonance recreation is available for free in our Vital Essentials pack. Anyways, let's get back to the video. The funny thing about digital synthesizers is that they create technically perfect waveforms. That's a good thing, right? Well, sort of. The thing is, real instruments, vocals, and even analog synthesizers have natural imperfections that come with them. It is these natural imperfections that are a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to creating emotional sounds. Would you rather look at a painting that looks like this, or a painting that looks like this? Think of a singer's vibrato or the natural grittiness that comes with a low note on a cello. These are things that happen naturally in the real world, but when it comes to digital synthesis, they have to be recreated manually. This is a very unintuitive thing at first, but the general idea is we want our sounds to be slightly less clean and slightly less perfect. For this video, we are going to be creating a patch in Vital that employs a few of these organic imperfections inspired by the real world. But at the end of the video, I will touch on a few additional manipulation techniques that top producers are using that let you take this concept even further. Let's start with an initialized Vital preset. We can set its level to around 0.225. Let's go for 9 unison voices with 3% detune. Here in envelope 1, I will set the attack time to be 0.024 and the release to be 0.625. Next, let's set up a filter for this oscillator. I'm going to use a digital 24 decibel low-pass filter. I'm going to remove the resonance and set the cutoff frequency to 18.12 semitones. If your cutoff frequency is displaying in hertz, you can change this here in the Advanced tab. Next, I'm going to set up a cutoff macro linked to the frequency of this filter. Let's drag it here onto the cutoff slider and set the value to be 21.5. Now when we adjust this macro, we get a nice clean sweep of the cutoff. Now let's begin on our pluck layer. I'm going to use a saw wave again and turn up the volume just a little bit to around 0.65. Additionally, I'm going to drop the random phase setting down to 0. As a general rule of thumb, I turn off random phase on any oscillator that I don't use unison. This creates a more predictable outcome, especially when dealing with complex filters and effects. Now I will enable filter 2 and set it to a 24 decibel digital low pass once again. While we are at it, we can route OS2, OS3, and the sample oscillator all into this filter to make things easier for us later down the line. I'm going to set the resonance around 22%, and I'm going to set the starting cutoff frequency to be -24 semitones. Additionally, I'm going to set key tracking to be at 25% so the higher notes ring out a little bit more. Unlike filter 1, we're going to be controlling this filter's cutoff with an envelope. Let's pop into envelope 2 and set some values. For starters, let's put the attack at 0.059 seconds, then the decay at 1.525, the sustain all the way down, and the release to 0.475. Now I'm going to adjust the tension curves to get a smoother shape. Let's drag this onto Filter's 2 cutoff slider and set the value to be about 50.7. We can put the cutoff macro onto this as well and set it to 18.22. For an extra touch, I'm also going to put this macro onto the decay of envelope 2. We can set this to 0.14. Let's take a listen to how it sounds. Up until this point, we have been creating a general starting point for our sound. From here on, we are going to add a few key elements that will drastically change the emotional impact of our sound. The first one of these is detune. Let's jump into LFO1 and set it to envelope mode with a 0.695 second frequency. Next, I'm going to set a custom shape here, but I really encourage you to play around with this and set a custom shape of your own. I'm going to move to the Advanced tab and drag this LFO while holding Shift onto the master tune. It is really important that you hold Shift while doing this to make this modulation bipolar. This way, the tonal center of the patch will remain the same. If you forget to hold Shift, you can right-click this after the fact and choose Make Bipolar. I'm going to set this value to 0.385. When creating detune for sounds, I like to have two sources. The first is a static envelope, like the one we just made that triggers on every note. The second source adds an element of randomness so that the pattern isn't too predictable. For this, you guessed it, I'm going to use the random LFO. Again, we can set this to around 0.7 seconds and enable sync here at the top. Once again, while holding Shift, I'm going to drag this onto the master tune and set it to 0.385. Now let's see what happens when we play some notes. Right now, the effect is too extreme for most cases, but we can fix this by creating a macro called detune. Now all I have to do is click and drag this onto the modulations we just created. Now we get a dry-wet knob for the effect. I think I'm going to leave it around 60%. Next on our list is to create some velocity tracking. All real instruments have this, so it makes sense to add it to our patch. Vital has a built-in velocity tracking knob down here that we can turn on, but this only applies it to the volume. I'm also going to drag from the velocity control over here and drag it onto the filter 2 cutoff while holding Shift to make it bipolar again. I'm going to set this value to be 30. Now listen to what happens when I play some notes at different velocities on my MIDI keyboard. The next step here is to add some organic noise layers to our sound. I'm going to temporarily mute the first two oscillators while we do this. Now let's enable the noise oscillator. We can leave it on the white noise here, and I'm going to set the value of the volume to be about 0.05. We can also enable shuffle. I'm going to create a second random source, turn on sync and stereo, and set it to be around 0.12 seconds. Let's drag this while holding Shift onto the white noise level. We can make this value 0.217. Finally, I'm going to enable oscillator 3 and set it to a sine wave that's pitched up 1 octave. Let's turn off the random phase and set the level to be around 0.25. I'm manually going to create a bit crush effect by editing the harmonics in the wavetable editor. You don't have to follow me exactly, but anything close to this should work. Also, you don't need to worry about the position of the lower bars here. These affect the phase of the harmonics and don't make a difference to the sound in this case. I'm going to use LFO2 to make a really fast LFO. We can start by making this a sine wave by pressing this button. I'm going to use sync mode to prevent clicks and set it to 0.037 seconds. I'm going to turn off smoothing and give it a little bit of stereo. While holding shift, I'm going to drag random 2 onto the frequency of this LFO. I'm going to set this to negative 0.148. All that's left is to hold shift and drag this onto the level. I'm going to set this value to around 0.5. I actually think I'm going to drop the level of oscillator 3 down just a little bit. You can make a macro for this if you want. The only thing we need to do now is add some effects. I'm going to start off with some nice soft clip distortion. Let's put the drive around negative 4.6 decibels or so. We can drop back the mix just a little bit. Let's add some chorus here. The default settings are okay for the most part. I'm just going to turn down the mix. And let's high pass this. Next up, I'm going to create a delay with some uncommon bounces to add even more of an organic feel. Let's use ping pong. And I'm going to set the second one to a 16th and let's make it dotted. Let's bring down the mix and make this a band pass. Next up, we could use some reverb. I want to let more of the high frequencies through and cut out some of the lows. Let's give it a smaller size, a little bit of additional chorus, and a slightly shorter time. After that, I'll add some good old multi-band compression and turn down the mix a bit. I'm going to add a phaser for some additional color. We can leave the settings on default and just drop the mix. And finally, let's add an EQ to polish the sound. And there you have it, the finished patch. Let's hear how it sounds. Now, as promised, let's talk about a few other ways that producers are adding organic elements to their tracks. Granular synthesis. Granular synthesis is a great way to create organic textures. A lot of the time, I find myself creating these textures out of instruments based around the note C, then key tracking them in the sample oscillator. Check out the early stages of this pad I made for an upcoming Vital pack that uses only this technique. I know I was very brief here, but I plan on making a whole video dedicated to this eventually. Get off the grid. By straying away from the default quantization used in your DAWs, you're able to create much more humanized grooves and rhythms. Turn off snap to grid and go off intuition instead of the lines you see on your screen. Experiment. All new genres are a result of experimentation, so don't be afraid to use plugins and sounds in crazy ways other than their intended purposes. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to check out more of our content at anima.audio. Take care.